As y'all have heard me say before, the most important part of planning any adventure are the snacks. And if you're looking for a delicious and nutritious snack that packs a real protein punch, crack into a good source of protein with tasty, healthy, wonderful pistachios. Each 1 ounce serving of wonderful pistachios contains 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value in that one serving. It's one of the highest protein nuts out there. And that's not all. Pistachios are also known for the fiber and better for you unsaturated fats, which may help keep you feeling fuller longer. Best part, wonderful pistachios come in a variety of flavors and sizes. Perfect for enjoying with your family and friends or taking them with you on your summer adventures for those snacks we're talking about. So whether you're dropping off the kiddos or running between meetings or about to climb a mountain, fuel up with a healthy and tasty snack. Wonderful Pistachios will be your new go-to. You can check them out at wonderfulpistachios.com and learn more about how these little green wonders can power up your day. Hey folks, welcome to the Adventure Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Mason. Today is a Throwback Thursday episode. We are talking to Davey du Plessis. This episode is originally from 2015, episode 121, and we're talking, Travis was hosting this episode, and we're talking about an adventure going dark or going bad. And what I mean by that is, one of the themes of this show is that the world is in a better place than a lot of us think it is. I know on the news, especially right now, there's a lot of conflict. It feels like the world's, at war. But remember, the news is the exception to the rule. That's why it's news. 99% of the world, I don't know the exact, percentage, but it's at peace. People are trying to get along. People are trying to just get on with their day, make some money, feed their families, have fun, enjoy their lives. The vast majority of people doing that, and adventure teaches you that better than anything I've ever done. But sometimes things do happen. We've definitely had a lot of stories on this show of when things go awry, things don't go to plan, or when we see the darker side of humanity. This is one of those stories. It's not meant to scare you or dissuade you, but to show you, some of the reality that can happen. It's not always rainbows and sunshine. And those stories are really fascinating. There's a lot of lessons we can learn in them. And also, it helps being prepared. It helps to know what you're getting into. It helps to be ready for certain circumstances, but to not walk around with a sense of fear, but a sense of, just knowing, being aware of your surroundings, and sometimes things happen. And this is Davey's story. It's a powerful story, and we haven't shared it in a long time, so I'm looking forward to sharing it. All right, let's go ahead and dive in.
Welcome to another episode of the Adventure Sports Podcast. This is Travis. Davey du Plessis, an avid cyclist and paddler, wanted to solo navigate the full length of the Amazon River by kayak from its source in the Andes of Peru to the Atlantic Ocean in Brazil. After about 2 months and 2,000 kilometers, his amazing adventure took a dark turn. Davey is here with me today to describe the events that changed his life. Davey, welcome to the show.
Hi, Travis. Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you. I appreciate you setting aside the time to tell us about this amazing story.
Yeah.
I want to start with who Davey was when he was a kid. Were you an adventurous kid? How did you come up and end up being such an adventurous person?
To be honest, I was never adventurous. I still really don't consider myself too adventurous either. I grew up surfing. Surfing has probably been the most dedicated I've been to anything in my whole life. But adventure kind of, I would say, I fell into it purely by accident, because the first adventure I did was I cycled from Egypt to South Africa, and that came about when I was at breakfast with some friends, and I heard this one girl talking to another girl saying her brother is planning to cycle from Egypt to South Africa. And I was like, wow, that sounds awesome. Again, I was eavesdropping on their conversation, and then I said to her, I said, do you think your brother would mind if I joined him? Just because I thought it would be so cool. I mean, even though I come from South Africa, I hadn't seen much of Africa, and generally that's the case with most South Africans. If we go on a holiday or we go explore other countries and we neglect our own continent. And when I heard this, I was like, well, this sounds awesome. And I got the guy's number, I SMS'd him or sent him a text, and then fortunately he said, yeah, you can join. And then when I did that first trip through Africa, that kind of just provided this awesome experience, but also it provided a platform for me to feel like I was actually contributing some positive things to humanity. And adventure really not so much the activity itself, but it became this inspiring platform for me to kind of be a form of activism, and that's what got me hooked with adventure.
So were you a cyclist going into that, or was that something completely new to you?
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, with all these adventures, I've had absolutely no experience. I mean, before I did the cycle through Africa, literally the week before, I got my bike, and then I cycled from my home to my dad's house, and that was like, I think it was about 10 kilometers. And that was the most I'd ever cycled. And then the next week we flew into Egypt and we did like 120 kilometers a day, and then we just carried on and we averaged 100 Ks for 4 months. But I had absolutely no experience. I kind of do think experience is a bit overrated with these things also.
That's great. So this guy just let you sign on to his trip, and I assume he was a bit of an avid cyclist when he planned to do this. So how does he just agree to let some guy tag along that really isn't a rider?
Well, yeah, he had cycled a bit of Southeast Asia before. You know, he had done some cycle touring. Um, I think he joined, or he allowed me to join because he had other friends that were going to join, but one of them got engaged and pulled out. So I think he was still committed to the project. And yeah, I think maybe he wanted the company, or he didn't want to do it alone. I don't know. But he just allowed me to join. I didn't tell him that I wasn't a cyclist. I said, no, no, I'll keep up. Don't worry. And fortunately, I did. I mean, that was mainly because Egypt is flat. You know, we started in Egypt and we went through Sudan, and it's just flat. There's no hills. There's not even like a slight incline. So I was lucky that we started there, because then I could kind of acclimatize and accommodate long days of cycling.
So how did you prepare for that? I mean, if you weren't an avid cyclist to begin with, you weren't set up with the equipment. Did you just simply run out and get a decent bike and get going? Or I mean, how much time
Well,
did you have to plan for this?
I actually got the same bike as him, because I thought, well, if he uses it, maybe I should get it. And it was a bike that he got from the States. I think it's by a company called Surly. And I didn't have money at the time, but my car had been stolen. And I got a small amount of insurance payouts, and I used that to buy the bike, and then I had the bike sent in. But I just copied what Ricky did, because I was completely oblivious to what bike I need, what equipment. I mean, he even had spare pannier bags that he loaned to me. So essentially, I got in there very green. I was so captivated by the idea that that's what kept me going.
That's great. Well, that says something about you that you can just kind of dive into something like that and pull it off. I mean, so tell me about that journey. How long was it, and you know, how did it all go with you guys not having known each other?
Well, so that was 4 months. We went through, I think it was 9 African countries. We did the east coast of Africa, and then eventually finished at Ricky's home in South Africa. Um, we dedicated the whole project to Habitat for Humanity, and we were in every country we went through. We were fortunate to go and see the work that Habitat for Humanity was doing. You know, seeing the housing issues within Africa. So that was essentially why we did the whole thing. But then I think, I mean, I remember this was a long time ago, but it was just under 10,000 kilometers. We did it in 4 months. Our relationship, we never really had a relationship before, and we never really maintained it one after. But whilst we were cycling, yeah, we were good. We were good to each other. I think there was a pro and a con to not knowing each other going into it, is that we had time for our relationship to develop. I think we only argued once the whole time, and it wasn't even a serious argument. It was about whether we stay at Kilimanjaro or we go and watch South Africa play a football game against Tanzania. But other than that, I think we were both committed to getting back home to South Africa, and we worked while we were together. But then after, our relationship just kind of faded. But while we were there, yeah, I think we worked good together, and yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool. So normally I would ask our guests why they would encourage people to do their particular sport, but in your case, I want to ask, why might you encourage somebody to just kind of jump into something so amazing like this without the planning?
Well, the planning had been done by Ricky, whereas the physical activity, not at all. Even the plan, the route that we chose changed lots of times. But maybe it's because I'm young and I've heard that experience is so crucial so many times. I just got sick and tired of hearing it, and I said, well, I can't encourage anyone to do something if I'm always harping on about experience. And even when I spoke to other guys, also because I'm a vegan, they were like, no, you won't be able to uh, achieve the daily endurance because you need to be eating animals. And there was just so much junk that I was hearing from people. And I said, no wonder why no one does these things, because you get put off before you even start. And I never wanted to be like that. I wanted to encourage people from the beginning. And the reality is, if you've got legs and you've got a bicycle, even if you don't have a bicycle, you can walk. It's not a race. We took 4 months. You can take 10 months. You can take 10 years if you want. I think I always say that as long as you have just enough motivation to do it, that's all you really need. You can learn how to get fit. You can learn how to cycle. You can trust that you have the capability to deal with whatever challenges you face. But you're never going to do it if you are beaten before you even reach the start line. And that's why I just said I don't want to go into this being a professional cyclist and spend these training days. And I just said, let me just go into this as green as possible, and if I can adjust, anyone can. And my whole thing is, the unfortunate thing is that if you're going to do something that's different, expect a lot of negative perceptions. And all you got to really learn is just to be a good filter, filter out all the junk that people say and just do it. I don't think there's anything else that I could say. I wouldn't, even when I went to the Amazon, never prepared. I've got another adventure now, never prepared. I think the biggest thing is it's a mental challenge, but the reality is you can only deal with these mental challenges when you're actually physically on the adventure, so you can't even prepare for that. So just do it, I would say.
Oh, very well said. Well, before we get off of the cycling trip in Egypt, I want to ask: is there a decent or is there an amazing experience that you had on that trip that you'd like to share?
The most amazing experience and the highlight for me was also one of the most saddening things. Before I left for this trip, I thought I would be cycling through Africa and I would be experiencing this raw, intact nature. I love nature, and that's essentially what was one of the biggest draw cards to the cycle through Africa, is because I thought every day I'd be seeing wild animals and I'd be in the thick African bush. And when the cycle commenced, it didn't happen like that. Africa, whilst maybe the perception from your side of the world is that Africa is this this place full of natural wonders. The reality is it's been just as developed and commercialized as every other country. And now, the only time you ever see wild animals and you see like what wild Africa would have been like is in the tiny game reserves. Otherwise, the rest has been converted into agriculture and, urban sprawl. But I didn't know that. So when I got to Africa, I was just depressed because all I was doing was either cycling through areas of poverty, areas of monoculture, agriculture. The only animals I was seeing were either stray dogs or people's livestock that they didn't look after. And then about halfway through, when we were in Tanzania, we cycled through a small portion of a game reserve that actually had a main road going through it. So it wasn't private. It was actually a natural heritage site. And when we cycled through that, it was a full day of cycling, but I saw elephants for the first time, and we saw like a huge herd of elephants literally 10 meters on the side of the road. And it was just us on our bikes. And it was such an amazing experience to be seeing elephants from a bicycle seat. And I felt so vulnerable, but I was like, this is what I expected. This is what I thought Africa was like. And it remained a highlight because it was the only time I ever saw wild animals. But obviously also saddening because that's the state of Africa. We aspire to develop like you guys have in America. But when you develop for humans, you destroy everything else. So I think, there's two sides of the coin to that. But that was by far the experience that I sit with, and I always reflect on that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I actually saw, some video footage of you filming yourself with the elephants behind you.
Yeah, yeah.
It's as you spoke about that and that being surprising to you, it really hit me, because when I was watching the video, you looked like you were kind of beside yourself, that you were seeing these elephants. And I think in my mind, I'm thinking, well, why is he so surprised? Like, of course, Africa's full of elephants, just roaming around. I've never been there, and you're right. And the image that we see is that, yeah, the wild game is all around you. Of course, it must be, right?
Yeah, not like that. Well, I mean, it's like me thinking, if you live in, you're in California,
Colorado.
That's like me saying, well, maybe it is, but that you guys just walk out of your home and there's bears roaming the streets. It's not like that.
Right.
This is what happens when people adopt what you guys do. We adopt the Western mentality and we strive to develop big cities, but you can't develop a city and hope that you're going to keep nature intact.
Right.
A city is based on exploiting nature. And the reality, that's what Africa is like. Huge parts of it. Even the parts where there is still untouched, well, I say untouched, not untouched, but parts of Africa where it is not developed yet, all the animals have been hunted or killed. So, I'd be cycling through big tracts of, what I thought was dense bush, but you see absolutely nothing. You're lucky if you see a few birds. That's the sad state of Africa. Is it's not what National Geographic shows you. What National Geographic and the Discovery show you are these small private game reserves where animals are fenced in and protected from us humans.
Right. No, that's a good point. It's one fun thing about doing this podcast is we can have people on that have been down to experience the world as it really is and relay that to the rest of us, That's good.
Let's take a quick message break and hear from the folks that help make this show possible. I cannot tell you how excited I am about this partnership. Today's episode is brought to us by Yosemite National Park. If you know me at all, you know that Yosemite is my absolute favorite place in the whole entire world. I've been all over the world. I've seen almost every national park. Yosemite is special. It just has this aura about it, this just air that is magical and important. You can tell, it's one of the first protected pieces of land ever in the world. It's amazing. It is a window to heaven. And what makes it so great is the hundreds of miles of some of the best hiking trails in the world. Leisurely walks down in the valley. I'm talking like flat walks all the way to the adventurous treks with thousands of feet of elevation gain that have the most breathtaking scenes you could ever imagine. Iconic sites like Half Dome, El Capitan, the Mariposa Grove of giant sequoias. It will leave you awestruck. And with the fall coming, that means warm days and cool nights. There's also outside of the park the historic gold rush town of Mariposa. Boasts one of the best small town culture scenes in the U.S. Nearby Coulterville, named the friendliest town in America by Reader's Digest. And all throughout Mariposa County, you'll find a variety of options for lodging and recreation, rustic cabins to Four Diamond Resorts, and everything in between. Great dining options, museums galore, including the Yosemite Climbing Museum, which we've had people on this show from there, and even live music festivals. And if you're like me, you're into history and the history of the national parks, well, that's where it all got started. There is no place on earth like Yosemite. And in fact, beyond this partnership, I hope one day that we can take listeners of this show to Yosemite every year for a yearly retreat. So if you haven't already, plan your trip to Yosemite, plan your trip to Mariposa County, and go be mesmerized and awestruck just like I am every time I go. Are you a busy person with lots of passions and lots of responsibilities and very little time like me? Well, you might be a fan of Green Chef. Green Chef is the #1 meal kit for eating clean, dinners that work for you. They deliver everything you need to eat great the easy way this October. Feel your best with nutrition-approved recipes delivered right to your door. Easy to prep meals, all the ingredients you need, and pretty good-sized portions too. You know, I'm a big guy. I'm like 6'4", 220 on a good day. And, you know, I'm always worried, oh man, is this going to be enough food for me? Because I can put it down. Well, Green Chef, man, believe it or not, my family of 4 had leftovers afterwards. Now, granted, the kids are small, but I more than make up for what they don't eat. And we had leftovers. It felt good. I didn't feel sluggish. I didn't feel like I put too much butter or salt or anything on it. It was clean eating. Especially this time of year, things get crazy. Maybe the weather's turning in your area. And it's just tough. It's just tough to grocery shop. Man, that's one of my least favorite things to do. I'm thankful we can grocery shop, but Green Chef made it easy. Delivered it right to my door to make a home-cooked, nutritious meal for my family. So if you want to give Green Chef a shot, go to greenchef.com/60ASP and use the code 60ASP to get 60% off plus free shipping. That's an insane deal. 60% off. Again, that's greenchef.com/ASP60 and use the code ASP60 for 60% off and free shipping. The link's in the show notes. Green Chef, the #1 meal kit for eating well. That is plenty of that for now. Let's get back into the episode.
Well, often in our shows, we ask our guests about a time that things didn't go right. But this question is really why I have you on the podcast, because you have an absolutely amazing story about a trek down the Amazon. Mark Kalch introduced me to you and your story, and I had him back on a few episodes ago, and he talked about paddling the Amazon and introduced me to you. So can you start from the beginning and take plenty of time to tell this story, go into the detail? I really want to paint the picture for myself as much as the listener as well, because I want to hear your whole story about how this all happened.
Okay. Well, I mean, one thing I will mention when you talk about Mark Couch, when I was planning to do this Amazon, I actually decided to do it whilst I was cycling through Africa, and I heard about Mark Couch, and I emailed him, and he was the only guy I emailed that had actually done it, and he was the only guy who was encouraging. He sent me an email. He said, "You're going to hear a lot of people giving you these negative perception." He said, "At the end of the day, you can do it. If you want to do it, just do it." And I think a lot of my attitude was inspired by the way he just, he was the only guy that actually did it, but he was the only person encouraging other people to paddle or to go navigate the Amazon River. And that's where I kind of draw a lot of my inspiration from, is from Mark Couch, just because he has a great attitude.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, a very inspiring guy. Um, so I plan to navigate the Amazon River after this Africa cycle, and I plan to do it within a year after arriving back from Africa. And the whole reason I was drawn to the Amazon was because I realized how nature had been destroyed in Africa, and I thought, where else on the planet can I go and expect to actually experience some raw, intact nature? And I thought, well, the Amazon jungle, it has to be. I thought, Amazon jungle is always highlighted as this wondrous place full of different species and still has these big, vast tracts of undiscovered jungle. And I thought, okay, I want to go to that jungle. I want to see it. And I also was telling myself that at the time that if Africa has been destroyed in such a short time, it's only a matter of time before the Amazon starts to be exploited for its species and its resources and its perceived wealth. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna go into the Amazon. But then I thought, you can't just go into the Amazon. I was also inspired to go into the Amazon because I wanted to encourage people to care more about animals and to care more about the environment and to care more about nature. But I know I couldn't just go on this casual holiday into the jungle. First of all, because it would be a manufactured experience if I went with a tour guide. And secondly, if I had a message, I couldn't really promote it if I was just being carted around as a tourist in a country. So I thought, okay, go to the Amazon jungle, attach this message of empowering people to care more about our environment and encouraging people to take responsibility because we're all part of it. And third, you're going to have to do something that's significant. And I thought, okay, obviously the best way to experience the jungle is to follow the river. And that's when I then decided to navigate the entire Amazon River from its source to the sea. And bear in mind, again, this was with no experience. I mean, I'd never paddled a river before in my life. Well, I lie. Actually, when I was at school, we did like these spirit building, these I think you guys call them camps, adventure camps.
Right.
And I did it with a few of the guys in my class. They just put you in like a big whitewater raft and they push you slowly down a river. It's a very harmless introduction into paddling. But I mean, that's all I'd really done. And besides surfing, that's the only experience I had with any turbulent water. So I went to the Amazon. I started because of the source of the Amazon. At that point it was documented to start at this mountain called Mount Mismi, and essentially where the first meltwater off this mountain eventually forms the tiny trickle which forms a bigger stream, and then eventually it forms the Amazon River. So I started from the top of that mountain. I had to hike up there, and that was about, I think it's about 5,600 meters above sea level, which is almost the same size as Kilimanjaro. And again,
Right.
I had no hiking experience. I mean, I just thought, okay, well, let me just go find this thing. And I found it. I got to the top there, I summited that, and then that's when the journey officially started. And from there, I then cycled for about just under 1,000 kilometers, because a lot of the river was either non-existent, it was too small, or it was too turbulent for me to paddle. And because I had no experience, I thought if I paddle this, I probably won't even be able to make the end of the river. So I thought, well, let me cycle along the river because I can do that. And I cycled for, just under 1,000 kilometers. And then eventually I hit the jungle and I started paddling. There's a funny story that I never really tell because of what happened in the jungle always just trumps everything else that I experienced in the jungle. But when I started paddling, the first day I had one of these foldable kayaks that I'd never used. I put it in the water, and I realized how completely unprepared I was, because I set off on that first day and I went through some rapids and I almost broke the whole kayak. And I thought, well, now what? If I break this kayak, I will never make the rest of this 4,000 or 5,000 kilometers of the river. And I only really had
daunting.
yeah, it was very daunting. And I remember after that first day, I realized I only had about maybe 60 or 70 kilometers of white water to go through before the river eventually opened out, and then it would be easy to paddle. But I thought if those 60, 70 kilometers, I can essentially end the whole expedition just by destroying the kayak or drowning. So what I decided to do then was to pack up my kayak, and I left it at a small town, and I went and bought a truck tire tube, and I inflated that, like a big floating ring.
Right.
And I tied myself to that, and I floated down the river for 70 kilometers till I got through all
I
the
had no
rapids.
idea.
But I mean that's just I just had to adapt, and again, it comes at that point. I had absolutely no experience,
That's awesome.
but you just find a way. But then eventually, after that, I got to paddling, and I paddled for about 3 weeks, and eventually I'd done just over 2,000 kilometers of the river. So I was roughly a quarter, maybe just over a quarter of the way of navigating the Amazon. And by this time, I'd adjusted to living in the jungle. I knew that I would eventually, well, at least I thought I would eventually make the source. I mean, the end of it where it meets the Atlantic Ocean in Brazil, and it was on day 56. It was 2 months into the adventure, and I was paddling, just innocently thinking, a couple more months, and I eventually reached my goal. And I saw these two guys come past me on what they call a peke peke. It's like one of their motorized boats, and I thought it was fishermen in the beginning, because I'd seen fishermen throughout the journey, and I saw them. They came past me, and then they disappeared behind a big bend of the river. And I just, I didn't expect anything. I was never suspicious because I had seen guys like this throughout the adventure. And about 10 minutes after seeing these guys, I just carried on paddling, and I just felt something slam into my back, and I thought it was a bird or something, but something hit my back, and it knocked me off my kayak. And because the force against my spine was so severe, it put me into a paralysis. And before I could realize what was going on, I just sank deeper into the Amazon River. And I was incapable of swimming, and I thought I was going to drown because I couldn't move my body. And while I was sinking underwater, and because it happened so quickly, I was like, what the hell is going on here? How was I paddling 1 second, and then the next second now I'm sinking in the river and I can't even swim? And I sank deeper and deeper, and then eventually I got to like the depths of the river, and I managed to get a bit of movement from my waist down, and I kicked water to the surface. And when I got to the surface, I thought, what the hell is going on here? I thought, like, did a bird fly into my back? It just was crazy. It was such a foreign feeling, just from out of nowhere. I just felt this thing hit my back and knock me off my kayak. And I remember looking around to see if it was a bird. Maybe this bird has probably broken its neck and is lying in the water. And I saw nothing. It was just me and my capsized kayak in the jungle. And I thought, I just couldn't piece together what was going on. And I thought, okay, well, keep yourself afloat, swim to your kayak. And I started swimming to the kayak, which was capsized. And just before I got to the kayak, a second impact hit me in the head. And it was like someone had taken a cricket bat or a baseball bat, and that hit me in the head. But I didn't hear anything. I didn't feel any pain. You just feel this massive sensation, this force. And then I was just left bewildered, like, what is going on? I thought, okay, maybe there is some animal that's attacking me in the Amazon River, and it's just coming up and striking at me, then going underwater again. And I thought, okay, get out the river, get out the river. I wasn't too far away from the riverbank, and I kicked water to the riverbank, and then eventually I got to like knee-deep water, and I just collapsed, and I sat down, hunking over my knees with my shoulders. I was just like, what is going on here? And when I sat there, a third impact hit me on the right side of the head. And when it hit my head just went limp, and I just kind of remember my head just dropping into the water. And I remember I was just drooling because I was pretty much numb all over my body, and I felt like I was losing control of what was going on. But on that third impact, I then pieced together, okay, you've been shot. someone in the jungle is shooting at you. And when my head dropped into the water, because one of the shots had punctured my carotid artery, I remember just looking in the river that I was sitting in, and I just saw this big patch of red, and it was slowly expanding, and it was due to that punctured carotid artery. And I realized I must be bleeding out from somewhere in my body. And when I pieced this all together, I'm like, okay, you're bleeding out in the middle of the Amazon River. You've been shot, but you don't know who's shooting at you. Someone is shooting at you from somewhere. I just said, there is no way you get out of this. It just didn't make sense. And when I pieced together what was happening, I just said, this, I convinced myself that this is where you die. This is the end of your life. And when I told myself that, I closed my eyes and I lay into the river, and I just waited. One of the strange things I remember going through when I thought that this was the end is that when I lay into the river and I closed my eyes, I'm not religious, and I don't believe in a God, but I lay back into the river and I thought, okay, well, if you're gonna die, now is the perfect time to test whether a God exists or not. And I lay back and I actually told myself, I said, okay, if Jesus is out there, now would be the perfect time for him to show himself. I lay back
sure.
and I didn't see Jesus. Okay. I said, maybe it's not Jesus, maybe it's Allah. And I was like, maybe if Allah is out there, please show yourself, because I will believe if you want me to believe. And I think I was so scared that I was trying to find out that I just wanted some comfort, and I thought that if there was ever a good time to believe in a God, now was it. And I just ran over these situations and saying, okay, what if God's going to come? What's he going to look like? And it distracted me from the actual situation, which was actually quite pleasant.
Wow.
But as I lay there going over, thinking, okay, is Jesus going to look like a man, or will he look like a ghost, or is it a woman? Is he white? And I just ran over and over. And whilst I was going through this, I heard this boat coming up river, and it kind of distracted me from that mindset I was in. And I kind of woke up from this funk, and I was like, okay, what's going on? You're back in real life now. You can hear something. And I sat up and I looked at the boat, and I saw it was one of those two guys who had passed me not even 10 minutes ago. And when I saw him, I realized that his friend, who was dressed in a yellow t-shirt, must be the guy hiding in the jungle behind me. He's the guy shooting at me. And now this guy who's coming up on the boat is obviously checking if the job has been done, to see if I'm dead or not. And when I saw him, I then staggered up to my feet and I started to plead, to beg for my life. And I begged because I couldn't understand what I'd done wrong to deserve this. And I said, you can take my things, just please leave me alone. I didn't do anything. And the more I begged, the guy just didn't care. He just had no expression. And I realized, if you're still here begging, and this guy reaches you, he's probably got a machete in his boat, and he will make sure he kills you. And when I realized that, I said, okay, you can't wait to hang around here to see if this guy is going to be forgiving to you or not. And I just said, get out of the situation, run. And I took off into the jungle. And as I ran into the jungle, again, I left all my kayak, I left all my equipment, I just ran into the jungle. The guy fired a fourth shot that hit me in my leg. I ran through the jungle for a couple kilometers, and then eventually, out of nowhere, I found these two other guys from another community. And I mean, they literally just appeared from nowhere. Well, they actually appeared on the opposite side of the riverbank. And I managed to get their attention, but I struggled for a while because I had also, from the shots, I had a punctured lung. So I couldn't make a loud enough sound. I couldn't get enough pressure in my lungs to actually shout to these guys. So I saw them across the river, and I was trying to shout, but all I could do was just like wheeze. And then eventually one of them saw me. They physically saw me, and I think it was because I had a blue shirt against a green background. And they saw me, they came and picked me up, and then they took me into their community. And when I got into their community, again, I'm piecing this story after it happened. But when I got in that community, I don't speak Spanish, and I had no idea what these guys were saying. But eventually what I pieced together was that there's a hospital, but it's still 24 hours away in a city called Pucallpa. And they can't help me because they don't have enough petrol to get a boat all the way there. And what they then decided to do was to take me to another community downriver, which was slightly bigger, again, but these are very indigenous, primitive communities. They live solely in the jungle. They have no connection with the outside world. And they said, okay, we'll take you to the bigger community downriver, and maybe they may be able to help you. They then put me in one of their boats. We went down to this river. This was about 6 hours after I'd been shot. We get to the second community, which is now going into Saturday evening. And this community doesn't want to help me because they want money. And I obviously had no money because I left everything when I ran away from the guys who were shooting at me. For must have been about 2 or 3 hours, we just, we kind of stagnated on the riverbank because they would come up to me, the new community guys, and they would say, we want to help you, but we need money. And then I would say to them, I have no money because I left everything in the kayak when those guys were shooting at me. And they'd say, okay, we understand. And they would go and they would discuss with each other on the riverbank. And they'd come to me and they'd say, we still need money. And I would be like, well, I still don't have any money. Nothing's changed in this situation. I've been here on the riverbank the whole time waiting for you guys. But eventually what happened is I knew I had internal bleeding. And my initial concern was that I was filling my lungs, because my breathing was getting very restricted. But I didn't realize my breathing was restricted because my lung was punctured. But I kept on thinking, you know what, you're going to drown in your own blood. This is taking too long. And whilst I was there and these guys were having the discussion about money and whether I had money or not, I started to throw up a lot of blood. I know it was a lot because there was a guy scooping out all the blood out of the boat. And to make matters worse, some of the blood had been in my stomach for so long that it had coagulated. So when it was coming through my esophagus or my throat, it was choking me. So I had to put my fingers down my throat and crush up the blood just so I could breathe and that it didn't get stuck. It was a very gory experience, but it kind of interrupted the pattern that these guys were going through, where they then stopped the discussion and they all stood around me while I was vomiting. And I think that vomiting eventually kind of painted a picture that, okay, well, maybe this is a serious situation. We have to help this guy because I don't think he's going to live much longer. And then they didn't, after I threw up, there was no more concern about money or anything. They then just put me in a new boat and we head downriver. And I thought, okay, great. They've obviously seen enough. They know this is a serious situation. They know I don't have money and they're now going to help me. And we took off downriver, now going into Saturday night. And about 4 hours after the second community, they arrive at this spot on the riverbank. And again, it's pitch black. There's no infrastructure in the middle of the jungle. It's just dense jungle. There's no lights. There's nothing to indicate where these communities actually live. So they pulled up to this dark spot of the riverbank. They picked me up out of the kayak. They walked me into the jungle. And they all just left me. They just disappeared. And I thought, okay. I remember there's a scene, I don't know if you've seen the movie The Beach with Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah.
And, the one guy gets sick, and because he dampens the mood of all the party goers, they take him and they hide him in the jungle and they let him die there because they don't want to remind anyone of his death and his sickness because it's just too depressing.
Right.
And I thought I was reliving that similar scene where these guys had taken me out of their jungle or out of their community. I was a burden to them because for them it was a Saturday evening. They probably just wanted to have a good time and just chill and talk around the fire. But now they had to worry about me. And I thought, this is them getting rid of me. But eventually, after I was left in the jungle alone for about, it must have been half an hour, maybe a bit longer, I heard voices coming through the jungle. And it was those original guys with other guys. And then without saying anything. And again, they never explained anything, or maybe they did, but I couldn't understand Spanish. So I had no idea what was going on. And eventually, they just stopped speaking to me because they realized I had no idea what was going on. So I was always oblivious as to what was going on. But eventually, these guys came through the jungle. They picked me up, walked me through, put me in another boat, and we just took off downriver. Didn't tell me anything. And about 4 hours later, they did the exact same thing. They pulled up to the side of the riverbank, walked me into the jungle, and then all left me. And then 30 minutes later, they came back, picked me up, put me in another boat. And we did that through, eventually we passed through 5 different communities. And I only realized that they had, what I perceived as abandoned me in the jungle was actually protecting me, because they were essentially trespassing over another community's territory. And if you imagine from their perspective, or maybe I could relate it to you, but imagine your neighbor from a couple blocks down arrives on your doorstep in the middle of the night with a semi-conscious dead body and says, you know what, can you take this guy to a hospital? You're going to be like, are you kidding me? Don't burden me with this now. I don't want to deal with this dead body. And I think they were hiding me in case there was some flare-up between the communities that would then be pinned on me. So they were essentially protecting me and instead of neglecting me. And it took just under 24 hours. We passed through 5 different communities, and then we eventually got to the 6th stop, which was this hospital in Pucallpa. When we got to the hospital in Pucallpa, they didn't want to help because they wanted money and they wanted me to provide some identity. And again, I had absolutely nothing. And when I lay in that hospital for about 3 or 4 hours, and the doctors did nothing, and eventually I got a phone from one of the doctors, and I called my mom and I said, Mom, I've been shot. She then went on this Facebook networking spree. And about an hour after I spoke to her mom, 2 people walked into the hospital, and they said, we've heard what has happened. We're here to help you. They went to the doctors. They said, here we go. Here's money. You can start operating on this guy. Now, bear in mind, I'd been in this hospital for about 3 or 4 hours. The doctors had done absolutely nothing,
Wow.
Besides clean up a bit of the vomit that I threw up on the floor. The doctors then took me in for one x-ray. They took me out and they said, we've picked up shots lying close to his vital organs. We cannot help him because we don't have the facilities. We need to now get him to another hospital in Lima, Peru, which is on the capital or on the coastline. And this was now going into Sunday evening. And the problem was that no medical evacuation was prepared to do this flight because you have to fly over the Peruvian Andes. And at night time, it was just too dangerous. So what happened then was the guys who had stepped in to provide a surety, they then booked me on a commercial airliner. So like a domestic airline for you guys would be like if you're going to fly Colorado or to New York, just a domestic casual passenger airliner. They booked me on one of those, but the doctors didn't clean me up. All they did was they put me in a stretcher. And remember, I had puncture holes in my head. I was still full of blood. And they booked out 4 horizontal seats. They then put me on top of the seats in the stretcher, and they tied me into the plane with rope and the seat belts, and we took off. But I mean, imagine flying for you guys, if you're just flying from Colorado to Arizona, just like an hour domestic flight. You got your family on board, and then you look across, and there is this essentially a dead body that's full of blood and puncture holes, and he's strapped and tied down to the seat. You'd think, this is crazy. This is like where nightmares come true.
Yeah, I'd at least want a discount, I think.
Yeah, well, to be honest, I didn't think they would have wanted to fly, but no one was.
Man, that's amazing.
I was rushed straight onto the Air Max, and no one had time to say, hold on, this is not the flight that I want to get on. And especially if you have a phobia of flying, because of the state that I was in, no one could tell if I was alive or not, because I couldn't move really. And I just lay there, and I was so weak, and it had been almost 30 hours since I'd been shot, and I hadn't slept either. So I was in the worst case scenario. But eventually we got to the hospital in Lima, and there I was admitted to a proper hospital. And what had happened is I'd been shot 4 times, but I'd been shot with a shotgun. And the caliber of the shot, we call it buckshot. I don't know what you guys would call it.
Yeah, buckshot.
It's a buckshot, yeah, okay.
Yep.
We counted about 22 different shots dispersed all over the body. Obviously, I had a punctured lung, but the punctured lung was actually fortunate because when we looked at the first x-ray, what had happened is the right lung that wasn't punctured, it was about 3/4 full of blood, and then the left lung, which was punctured, was about 1/4 full of blood. And having a punctured lung actually prevented me from drowning in my own blood, so it was actually a blessing in disguise. I then had a punctured carotid artery where they then put a stent in. I had a punctured windpipe, and I had a punctured heart. And the shot that went through the heart is still in my heart. It punctured the outer wall and then got lodged in the septum. So it's right in the middle of the heart. If you can imagine where the core is of an apple, I have a shot lodged there. And the doctors left a lot of the shots in my body because it had taken about 30 hours until I got to hospital. And they said, if you're still living and we now go and retrieve those bullets, we could potentially cause more damage. And especially that one in the heart, because in order to remove that, they said I would have required open heart surgery, which is a very invasive surgery in itself. It was actually, again, it was also a blessing in disguise that it had taken so long for me to get to a hospital, because they said if I had been shot and then I'd got rushed straight to hospital, they would have already just started cutting me up and taking out all the shots. And again, that could have potentially been worse than the shots itself.
Right.
Obviously, the adventure was over. I mean, I was in and out of ICU for about 2-3 weeks, and then I was still in hospital for about a month. So a month in total. Obviously, I couldn't go back. Adventure over. I returned home after that month, and then when you go through something like that, you think, okay, maybe I should just go get a normal day job. Maybe this adventure stuff is just too crazy.
Let's take a quick message break and hear from the folks that help make this show possible. This episode is brought to us by Oris Watches. You know, what piece of equipment on any adventure that I'm honestly surprised by how much I use is my watch. And I'm wearing a watch right now. I always have a watch on. And I believe that you should check out Oris Watches. Oris is a 119-year-old family-owned independent watch brand based out of Holstein, Switzerland. The brand has been certified climate and carbon neutral since 2021, and every year releases a sustainability report. Oris only makes mechanical watches like the new Pro Pilot X Caliber 400 and the new Pro Pilot Altimeter featuring a 3D printed carbon case. If you're a fan of mechanical watches like I am, there's nothing in the game that's better than Oris, and you can discover the full Oris collection at a retailer near you or at oris.ch. So if you want that one piece of equipment in your life to be functional, to be useful, to be beautiful, artistic, check out Oris Watches. Oris, go your own way. This episode is brought to us by Oris Watches. You know, what piece of equipment on any adventure that I'm honestly surprised by how much I use is my watch. And I'm wearing a watch right now. I always have a watch on. And I believe that you should check out Oris Watches. Oris is a 119-year-old family-owned independent watch brand based out of Holstein, Switzerland. The brand has been certified climate and carbon neutral since 2021, and every year releases a sustainability report. Oris only makes mechanical watches like the new Pro Pilot X Caliber 400 and the new Pro Pilot Altimeter featuring a 3D printed carbon case. If you're a fan of mechanical watches like I am, there's nothing in the game that's better than Oris, and you can discover the full Oris collection at a retailer near you or at oris.ch. So if you want that one piece of equipment in your life to be functional, to be useful, to be beautiful, artistic, check out Oris Watches. Oris, go your own way. That is plenty of that for now. Let's get back into the episode.
You went through this whole ordeal. How do you, at least in the ordeal itself, how did you find the ability to trust people as you came upon different people? Did you just figure, well, I have nothing to lose and I might as well, throw myself at their mercy and see what happens? Or that psychological aspect of it must have been insane.
Well, one of the biggest things after this happened, and I actually I thought I was suffering from Stockholm syndrome. You know what Stockholm syndrome is?
I forget. Remind me.
It's when you empathize with your captors, or you empathize with someone who has done you
right, yeah.
really wrong. It's like women who fall in love with their rapists, or people who've been kidnapped and they decide to stay with their kidnappers. And after this experience, I never empathize with those guys to the point where I wanted to return to them. But I couldn't understand why I wasn't angry. Why? And never wanted justice. I never wanted revenge. Never wanted retribution. And it almost bothered me because I'd speak to people that say, you know what, if I ever found those guys, I'd kill them, We should go in there and get them. And I would just be like, nah, I don't want to do that, And they're like, when you almost lose your life. And again, there was no apparent motive for these guys to do it because it was never to take my stuff. It wasn't for material gain. Because if they wanted my stuff, instead of setting up an ambush, you could have just pulled up next to me in the kayak, put that same gun in my face, and just take everything. Why do you try hunt someone before taking his stuff? Surely the easier job is just to hold him up. And also, when I ran away from my stuff, the guy fired a fourth shot when I left my equipment. Why shoot me when I'm running away from my equipment? It doesn't make sense. So their motive was never understood, and I still don't know why. My assumption is that the priority was my life, and I think for them it was just a activity. It was a day to get over the boredom, and they know that they could potentially kill me and get away with it. But when you go through something like that essentially so senseless, you almost beat yourself up when you're not angry, or that you're not wanting to get these guys back. And I just couldn't understand it. And that's why I thought in the beginning that I must be suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. But then the more I thought about it, it wasn't that I was in denial of what happened. And it wasn't that I was trying to justify that, oh no, you know what, these guys probably had a difficult life or whatever excuses I could come up with. So I knew that I was aware of what happened, and I was aware of the situation. And that's what kind of convinced me that it's not Stockholm Syndrome that you're suffering from. But the more I reflected, I realized even though those two guys had shot me, all those people in the jungle who had essentially saved me, I must have passed through close on 150 people in that jungle who all had small decisions and small impacts that essentially ensured my survival. And what was most amazing about that was these guys, all of them, had they couldn't relate to me at all. And there was never any perceived benefit to them, because it's not like they thought I was going to eventually get to the city and then draw a whole lot of money and come and pay them. A lot of them did it from a very selfless point of view. And when I sat with that, I was like, maybe because I'd been shot, and literally after being shot, half an hour later, I experienced all the compassion and the selflessness of these guys. That's what became the main focus of the whole story. And that's what I'd been dwelling on. And to the point where when I'd seen that much good, it trumped the bad that I'd gone through, if there is such thing as good and bad. But seeing that much kindness from so many varied people and only experiencing a senseless crime from two people, I was in such a fragile state in that whole period. But the most of the time, I was actually being affected by these small acts of kindness and compassion. And eventually I left out of the jungle, always looking back on that. I never looked back on the attack. I only told the attack because that's an interesting story. But in my mind, I always think like, wow, why were those people so kind to me? It's amazing that they cared for me when they had there was absolutely no positive outcome for them. They just essentially cared for a human life, and a human life that was very different to theirs. And after, if that becomes your main center point of the whole experience, is the goodness and the kindness and the compassion, it makes sense that you would come out and feel more positive about the potential of humans versus the negative.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. The fact that you could look upon all of that good done by these other people probably helped you in the long run get through the ordeal psychologically,
Yeah,
just
definitely.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I would just agree. I
Yeah.
agree. again, when you're on when you're on that balance between life and death, depending on what state you're in, but I was hyper vigilant. I was hyper aware because I thought if I close my eyes or if I fall asleep, I may never wake up. I would always have to remember more or less where I was in the jungle, more or less how long I'd been on the boat, which direction of the river I was going in, because I thought that even if these guys say they did abandon me, I would then be left to fend for myself. So I had to be as conscious about the situation as possible, um, without knowing that the byproduct of being hyper aware is that I was absorbing a lot of the kind things that they were doing without actually dwelling on it. I was just accepting it in the present. Like there was a guy who I remember he put his hand on my chest and he sang this song, but it was a very emotional experience for him more than it was for me because I was more concerned with my welfare and getting out of this jungle. But for him, it was, I don't know if it was a spiritual moment for him. I have no idea, but because I was so open to that, it was kind of finding its little cave in my mind and sitting there. And then when I had time to reflect over this whole expedition, the most or the attack, the most I would say vivid memories I have are memories like that. When these very connected moments between humans. And I think that's essentially what was my saving grace and why I walked out of this without anger, without revenge, without having to dwell on a negative story, without feeling sorry for myself because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It has to be.
Yeah.
Well, wow, what an amazing story. I mean, that's it's like, our worst nightmare. Everything you described there is just that dream that won't end and you can't get out of it. You can't make sense of what happened. You come across people that might be able to help you, but you literally can't yell out to them. I mean, everything you described there is every word as I was listening was just like, this is the worst nightmare I could ever have. So it sounds like you've come through it with a very positive attitude. You're out speaking about it, but you're writing and speaking about the good that came out of it at the same time.
Well, the thing is, when I went on this adventure, and I wanted to promote caring. I wanted to promote compassion. I mean, that's why I'm vegan. I think to be a vegan is one of the very few ways that you can actually display compassion to all species. You can take compassion and you can display it towards animals and towards humans. And that's what I've been seeking. Sometimes I don't think the solution is about fixing things with technology or implementing new laws and changing an environment. I think that a lot of solutions are a byproduct of a shift in mentality. And my whole desire was that if people become more caring and more compassionate towards nature and towards each other, and if we care about each other, we will find the solutions. But we're never going to find solutions if we don't care for each other, and especially if we don't care for other species. So I'd always been looking for some story that could inspire that sense of caring, because I think that's where everything begins. If you don't care about things, you will never want to change it or you'll never want to make it better. And it was almost not that I invited what happened, but because I'd wanted something that could portray that message, I was able to convert that attack into essentially a message of compassion. Whereas I think even if I'd completed that adventure, it wouldn't have had as powerful of a message because it would have just been about a journey from A to B. And perhaps the message and the reason why I went to the jungle wouldn't have been as amplified as it was. And I think again, it's not that I invited that, but the reality is everyone goes through hardships, but most of us use our hardships to reinforce how miserable our lives are, how miserable humanity is. And whilst I can agree with that, I do think life is hard, and I do think there are a lot of elements to humans that are just horrid. But there's nothing that ever positive comes out of it if you just dwell on all the crappy things that happen to you in your life. you have to find a way to transform it. And I knew that a very long time ago because I'd read books that are from guys that inspired me, like the guy Viktor Frankl and Nelson Mandela. I was always inspired how they took tragedy and transformed it into some form of a triumph that was a lot better than just benefiting them. And I always wanted to do that, but it's very easy to say these things. You say that you can always find some positive light in your darkest times if you've never actually gone through anything challenging. I mean, I grew up in a very privileged home and my life's been very easy. But having this experience was the opportunity to inspire others, but also to test myself against, the ideas I had in my mind and actually whether I could apply them in real life.
Wow. Well, you're doing that for sure. Well, I want to tell people about your book. You've written a book about this story, and I'm sure people are going to want to go out and check it out for themselves and read the whole story. So tell me about that.
Well, I mean, I've given you part of the story. I don't think we have time to talk about the whole Amazon, but that's essentially what the book is. And I feel you can never tell a story like you can with the book. But the book, I mean, I don't really promote it. If you're interested in hearing what happened in Amazon, you can go watch. I've done YouTube talks about it, so I'm not too concerned about selling books and stuff. It's more about the message.
I want to put the book out there because actually I'm going to pick it up and read it because I want to hear the whole story. The book is Choosing to Live, and I'll put the links in our show notes so people can find that. And I want to give you due credit because this really is an amazing story. And like I said, or like we discussed, you're not telling this to tell about the horrors of what happened. It's also a story about people coming together to save another human being without anything being in it for them. So,
yeah,
absolutely. Okay. I want to go on to the next thing that you have on your plate. First of all, what drives you to continue to go on some of these adventures after an experience like this? I mean, for a lot of people, they would just throw up their hands, walk away, and say, you know what? I gave it a shot. This happened, and yeah, I'm going to go back to what we call normal life. What drives you to continue on and do this next adventure we're going to talk about?
So adventure to me has always been essentially a platform for activism. And I learned that through Africa. I learned that, when you do these adventures, because when we did the Africa adventure, we managed to raise enough money to get a house completed for this family in Tanzania. And at that point in my life, it was the first time I'd actually ever done something positive for someone else. And I'd been searching for that, when when I was younger, like I was 20, I had this complete change in my life. And it was all inspired by veganism, but I thought, I don't want to ever know that my impact on earth was negative or that I supported cruelty or that I exploited people. And whilst I do think it's very difficult to separate from that, when you live in civilization, you're dependent on businesses. But I had this huge change where, I don't care. I've never really cared about money. I've never cared about status. I think it's perhaps things of the old American dream that everyone bought into, but it doesn't make your life any better. And I never want, I got to a point where I said, I don't want to dedicate my life to getting me ahead. I'm fine. All I need is a bit of fruit, and that's it, to eat. And I said, I wanted to dedicate my life to the service of others and also to animals. And adventure just became that platform, and it was by pure coincidence. As I said, when I was just overhearing a breakfast conversation that I was introduced into adventure, but it did provide a very interesting platform where I could amplify whatever message I was spreading. I always use the analogy that the cause or the reason why I do these things is the hook, and the adventure is the bait, and the more intriguing and the more interesting the adventure, the more tastier the bait. But no one is ever going to bite that hook if they're not interested in the bait. And unfortunately, that's what the adventure serves as, just a very, very tasty bait to a lot of people. And I get to do a lot of media to talk about these adventures, but I can also interject with the causes. And so after the Africa trip, because that was Ricky's cause, mine has all been dedicated towards environment, always. But when I talk about environment, I don't talk about climate change. I don't care about that. The Earth, what makes the Earth unique is the life it supports. Otherwise, it's just a floating rock in the universe. And it baffles me that the environmental drive is about your concentration of gases in the atmosphere. Why don't we care about life? It bothers me. It bothers me that we've become so removed from other species that even when we're caring about our environment, we care more about carbon dioxide than the existence of living animals. So when I talk about environmentalism, I always talk about, to me, it's the animate aspects of Earth. It's the life. It's what makes life unique. It's what makes life special, is protecting life. And I use the adventures to promote that protection, but mainly, I focus on the mass extinction. We're living in a period of history now known as the 6th mass extinction. The extinction of the dinosaurs, that was the 5th mass extinction, and there were 4 previous ones. And the 5 mass extinctions that life has experienced were all due to these cataclysmic events like massive climate change, but that was due to the Earth's oscillation around the sun. Super volcanoes, meteors, but when you look at the past extinctions, it was all these outer-worldly catastrophes. It was never a species causing the extinction of other species. It's never been like that until now. Now we've entered the 6th mass extinction, where we're seeing extinction rates that potentially rival the extinction of the dinosaurs, the same amount of animals disappearing in the same amount of time. But what's unique about this is that it's caused all by humans. We're the first species in like 3.6 billion years of evolutionary life. We're the first species in all that time, and bear in mind, we've only been on Earth for about 200,000 years. We're the first species in all that time to be causing the mass extinction of other species. We're doing only what super volcanoes and meteors could do. And it's just so sobering that no people know about it. People don't care. We care more about filling our house with solar panels and finding a better way to charge our cell phone than we do with the fact that we're wiping out like 50% of all the frog species on Earth. And it's just sad. It's just sad that that's how removed we become from other life. And
Right.
essentially that's what adventure is. It's to take that message, and it's not to solve anything. Again, I'm not solution orientated, because I think very often when you focus too heavily on solutions, you actually amplify the problem, or you make it even worse. Because these problems don't need to be fixed by technology and by governments. Essentially, we need to correct the way we think about nature. If you neglect nature, of course you're not going to care about where they go extinct, which is exactly what's happening now. That's why no one knows about mass extinction. And I think it's remarkable that we could be living in a mass extinction. We're living similar to as if we were existing when all the dinosaurs were dying, but we're so oblivious that we don't even know they're disappearing. That's how neglectful we are. So my hope is that just by mentioning the mass extinction, and essentially to me it's the greatest environmental issue, because it's life. At the end of the day, if you wipe out a huge portion of life on Earth, whilst it may endure, it's still a lot more dangerous and a lot more catastrophic than changing the compounds in your atmosphere. It just doesn't make sense that we still harp on about methane and nitrous oxide and carbon dioxide when we're losing like 35 species a day.
Yeah,
So
it's
my
alarming
hope,
for sure.
yeah, when you look at I always refer to the conservative estimates, but again, they're estimates at best. But by the end of the century, we're looking at a 50% reduction in all biodiversity on Earth, which is huge. And that's just the end of the century, and we show absolutely no signs of slowing down or addressing the problems we're causing. And again, my hope is that all adventure does is it facilitates the conversation, so that the next time, if you're interested in adventure, and also I do get a bit of media coverage because the adventures are so different. But if it just pushes that agenda of mass extinction further up the chart of what real problems we're experiencing, my hope is that enough people will start to care, and enough people will start to dedicate their life to improving it somehow, some way. And essentially, that's all I can hope for. But again, it's not a positive story. I'm not out here either trying to promote that these are the fixes that we need to do, because I don't know exactly what we need to do, because it's too encompassing. It takes a huge amount of effort to cause just one extinction. To cause mass extinction is essentially looking at a whole system that is contributing to that. And that's,
Right.
I mean, that's it. It's I feel that if you're going to live on this earth, it's your duty to be active about some cause or some problem, because there's so many of them. And I think if you just neglect problems and you just go about living your own existence trying to get you ahead, I think that's a very selfish way to live. And again, adventure is just my platform. That's it. And I'll continue to use it as long as I find it is a good platform.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what about the this Atlantic project that you're about ready to embark on? Can we touch base before we wrap it up, just to hear about what it is you guys are doing?
So the Atlantic project is I've had a pedal boat designed and built, and we'll be using that to pedal from Cape Town, South Africa, to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. It's about just under 7,000 kilometers, and it's a pedal boat, so there's no engine, no sail. It's driven by like a bicycle system. But we expect it'll probably take about between 3 to 6 months. Obviously, we don't have a support team or anything, so we carry all our own food on board. We carry our own water. We have a water maker. I mean, that's the gist of the Atlantic project. But of course, obviously, all dedicated towards the sixth mass extinction.
Right. Well, that's quite the endeavor. So, how many guys are doing this?
But it's just me and my mom.
Oh, right on. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, your mom played a big role in saving your life and getting you out of your situation in the Amazon. So it'd be what a great trip to go out with her. And how did you convince her to do this?
I didn't
Or did she
convince
bring
her.
it to you?
She came to. I planned to do it solo. She came to me, and she just turned 50 this year. And to be honest, I don't know her exact motivations for doing it, but the nice thing and the reason why I wanted her, or I accepted her to join, was because she helps amplify the message. When you hear about a 50-year-old woman who's even further removed from fitting the adventurous profile that I am,
Yeah.
it just makes the expedition that more interesting and unique. And of course, the more unique elements you have, the more interested media is, the more interested other people are, and essentially the bait becomes more enticing, but there's always the hook that they're going to be forced to bite on, which is that mass extinction.
No doubt. No doubt. Well,
Yeah.
I'd love to get you and your mom back on after you get done with this trip. I would love to hear her experience or her angle from it.
Well, we're hoping to. I mean, we're leaving within hopefully the next 10 days. We've had a few hurdles because the South African government this has never happened here before. So they don't know what to do with us, because they don't recognize us as a vessel or an ocean crossing boat. So they just don't know what to do. You can't clear customs and immigration unless your boat's been registered. But they don't want to register our boat because they don't see it as a boat. So we're hoping
Interesting.
that it's just, again, these are just the hurdles that you encounter when you do these different types of things.
Well, it's all part of the adventure. I think you've lived through worse things. I think you'll probably manage to get through this one as well.
Oh yeah. That's true.
All right, Davey, man, thanks so much for coming on and telling us that story. It's just what an amazing life you've led, and it sounds like you're just pressing on and continue to do some of these amazing adventures. And I hope to have you guys back on to hear all about this next one.
Yes. Thanks, Travis, and thanks for giving me the time to share.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. All right, you take care.
You too. Thanks, Travis.
First of all, thank you so much for listening. It means the world to us that you choose to listen to this show. If you'd like to help us further, you can leave a review on iTunes, share us with your friends, your family. It goes a long way to grow in the show. You can also support us financially through patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. Link is in the show notes. And also, if you have an idea of who could be a good guest for the show, we're always looking for people to tell their story about the outdoors or adventure. So if you know someone, please reach out. Email us at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. And until then, get out there and have some fun.